Welcome to another episode of the Inside Bassmaster Podcast. I'm your host today, Ronnie Moore. My co-host, as always, the digital content editor of Bassmaster.com, Kyle, Jessie. And Kyle, before we get into it, just wanted to say to the fans at home, we appreciate the support of the podcast. We fired it back up for 2022. If you like it, give it a good review on the Apple Podcast, Spotify, all those streaming platforms. Leave a comment on what you may want topics to be like. Right now, we were just in the middle of the Elite Series season, so we've done a lot of tournament previews and recaps. Also, if you're watching on YouTube, like and subscribe to the Bassmaster channel. Drop some additional comments as well on what you'd like to see. But Kyle, today we have the fantasy fishing preview of Pickwick, and I really don't want to talk about how we did at Lake Fork. I made the vital mistake of not picking Lee Livesey on my Rapala team. I got him on my Drain the Lake team, but no one else for my Drain the Lake team showed up. So thank goodness I got double points, because then I just got up to average. And you have surpassed me and Drain the Lake by just 0.2%, but we'll get into Lake Fork probably. You'll rib me about it later. But when it comes to Pickwick, man, we are now in the second half of the season, and it's kind of game time for some of these guys who are outside the classic cut. They got to start catching them. And, man, this is going to be a place that I'm really excited to get to, because this is a place that me and you have both fished quite a bit in college this time of year as well. So we really should have a good figure on what's going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the reality of it is, here in the last several years, we haven't really experienced a true Tennessee River ledge style tournament. But with that being said, and I know you'll probably get into this a little bit more, it's not like that's the only thing that's going to play. But the fact that we haven't really seen it since, Guntersville in 2019, if you want to call that one, a true ledge tournament, but it wasn't one-off ledges. There was offshore fishing going on. But, when you talk about those Tennessee River ledge fishing beatdowns, the potential for this tournament to be that is definitely there. But, like always, I think we're definitely going to see some things that we may not have expected as well.
Yeah, and honestly, with where these anglers are taking off out of Counce, Tennessee, we are on the Tennessee side of Pickwick. And if you look at it on a map, it is the smallest little chunk of Pickwick that there is. Mississippi's the only other spot that's smaller than that, and that's just at the end of Bear Creek, basically. So Tennessee's the host this week, and they're taking off from a place that we've never taken off in an elite event. Every other college event, elite event, and most of the opens, except for last year's open, was taken off out of Counce. And they're all in McFarland Park down in Florence, Alabama, which has the tail race and the dam current there, all of that flow, all right there available at takeoff. And you have all of the shallow fishing around 7 Mile Island and the Woodlands, all within 5, 6, 7 minutes from takeoff. This time around, we're taking off in the middle of ledge capital. Some of the guys I remember in college, when we would go and run all the way from Florence towards Tennessee for some of the ledge areas, the farther you got away from takeoff, the less boats you had to occupy. And so some of those schools of fish that you could go and find and manage to yourself, you maybe stop on a community hole on the way down, but then you'd be able to go to a spot and ensure you almost had it to yourself. Or if you had to share it, there's 1 or 2 guys that went that far. And so we got to see a lot of different things. Hey, we had the Magnum Spoon debuted in one of our college events at Pickwick. Normally we have like bait innovation, and it pops up at the highest level. It's given to an angler in an elite event. They win it and they expose it. This one, the big Magnum Spoon from Nichols, that was a college kind of brought it to the spotlight there. And then every ledge event on the Tennessee River featured it for a good couple of years. We will see some anglers for sure throwing it as well. But Pickwick, like you said, we haven't had a good old Tennessee River beatdown in the summer lately. We did have Guntersville last year, but with how much eelgrass and grass in general that Guntersville's had, you can fish Guntersville shallow all year now and still be able to compete with some of those schools, because it's so hard to fish some of those offshore schools with floating grass around and whatnot. So that lake has changed a little. But Pickwick, we got a little bit of a teaser on day 1, 2, and 3 of the Fork event. We're going to have a little bit of bumper boats going on. We're going to have some guys sharing some spots, some guys having some, conversations, whether they're civil or not. They're going to have some conversations, because there's going to be some guys who find the same fish for sure. And on the edge of the area we're taking off from, it is ledge capital. I mean, there's not a tremendous amount of shallow water, high percentage areas that we're going to see factor there. And so we'll see some guys make some long runs just to get away from the ledges, but most of the time we're going to see guys fishing ledges.
Sure. And that's kind of the interesting thing that we'll have to keep an eye on, is, like you said, the opposite for what we're used to seeing in college tournaments, people running away from Florence by the dam to run to the offshore fish down at the bottom end of the lake. It might be the opposite now, where some of the guys that fish shallow are making those long runs, but just to get away from people. So, it'll likely work both ways, I'm sure, but it'll definitely be interesting to, like you said, see Pickwick, be at its best as far as ledge fishing goes. Obviously the combination of time of year, where we're putting in, I definitely think there'll be some entertaining days to watch on Bassmaster Live with that, no doubt.
And I'll say, I don't know how much experience you have there, but I had, every single year, 2 or 3 events in the summer, it seemed, were on Pickwick. And I've had success, top 20s fishing ledges offshore. It was not my forte. I had a partner who loved fishing offshore, and in Mike Corbishley, and he was able to really do all of the graphing and, hey, let's do this, let's do that. And then we had to manage some of those spots and those schools of fish. But then there was times where I was the boater, and the ledge fishing, I did not want to fight with people or get necessarily screwed based on boat number and my boat performance. We could only go 50 to 55 miles an hour, getting beat to those ledges. So I fish shallow in some of the events, and you can still get a top 25 or 30 out of a 250 boat field fishing shallow. But I will say, if you catch 17 to 18 pounds and you're in contention, it is so hard to do that 2 days in a row. You can do it 2 days in a row. There's always 1 or 2 guys that get top 12 shallow. Doing it 3 days in a row, very difficult. Doing it 4 days in a row, it would have to be a really good area, or you'd have to expand upon it. So that's one thing that I'll say. Maybe some shad spawn, or just lingering fish up shallow, from that pattern, over the last few weeks. We have a college event at Pickwick right now from the Boat US series. Wade Middleton and his crew are running that. So we're kind of seeing how 16 to 18 pounds is going to be a pretty common thing, but I know that's not going to be the winning top end weight. You're going to have probably 20 a day to sniff the win, or to get the win. And so when it comes to fantasy fishing, I know we got to make up some points probably. I know in Rapala Bassmaster Fantasy Fishing, I took a step back a little bit this week, was at 85%. Now I'm at 80% basically. So I've got to catch up. So why don't we jump in and get to our picks a little bit quicker than we normally do. And let's talk about our Rapala teams. I'm going to go ahead and kick it off with my bucket A pick. And I'm going a little bit off the radar percentage wise. And I people probably get tired of hearing that. But when you look at the people who are picked, Brandon Polinick, David Mullins, I expect David Mullins to do well. Gerald Swindle, any of these Alabama or Tennessee River guys will be picked, but it's so hard to figure out who's going to find the schools of fish. We talk about it. You're kind of throwing darts at a board. The guy could find the schools of fish and lose them, or not get there first and end up being second to the spot and having to share it, or getting out of timing, rhythm, whatever it is. And, or just no current flows and you just can't get a bite. So we're not only picking guys we think that can catch them, but also may time it up, appropriately. And so I'm going a little off the radar. I'm going 2% Matt Airy, North Carolina angler, but he is great at fishing offshore. I know he's done well in the past, especially when he was at the FLW Tour and they fished Kentucky Lake, some of those other places. He's got the ledge experience. And I think that this could be a good bounce back event from him. He didn't have a good event at Fork, and he was kind of mad about that because he enjoys fishing offshore. He really does. But I could see him being a guy who goes and maybe runs to a great school of fish, catches a few fish, maybe close. And because of a, time of day, if you can get on a school and catch a limit really quick, he can maybe still go shallow and capitalize on that, and then come back out and fish his second, third, fourth schools, or do that rotation, start shallow, maybe find some riprap, some shad spawn, catch a couple fish winding real quick, and then go out to schools. And I think that he could be one that we see play with a big jig, Carolina rig, maybe a mag spoon, crankbait as well. So I like Matt Airy for this one. There's no other rhyme or reason as that I looked at him and was like, you know what? I feel like this is one every year he jumps out and does well. I remember Eufaula in 2020. It was in June as well. And he ended up getting a top 10 there, was a leader one of those days as well. And he fished shallow and deep. He managed it both. So I'd like to see him maybe channel and get a top 10 this year doing that.
I was waiting for a break because I was going to bring up that Eufaula tournament, actually. Catching them shallow on a frog and then being able to fish them, fish brush and fish offshore schools. That's a really good point. And I think that's a really good pick. And at 2%, that could be a killer pick in bucket A. So I'm pretty much going with the same strategy, I guess you'd say, that I've went all year, make a couple chalk picks if I'm confident that they're going to be the right ones. And then obviously back it up with a couple lower percentage guys as well. And I'm doing that with David Mullins and Bucket A for the same reason you just kind of mentioned. When you think of David Mullins, I think, right off the bat, for the longest time, really the initial thought was basically deep ledge fishing. And he's obviously proved over the course of his career that he's fantastic at doing that. But, it's been interesting to see the evolution of his style and, how he likes to fish. He mentioned, interestingly enough, on Mercer's podcast, that, anymore he almost prefers to fish shallow because of the amount of guys that fish deep now, obviously with electronics being the way they are. With that being said, I think this tournament sets up so well for him. He's had such a good year to this point, sitting third in AOY points. I don't mind going chalk with David Mullins and Bucket A at 13.9% at the moment.
I really like that pick as well. And one thing I will say is, yes, you want to try to have those guys. So it's a good and a bad thing to maybe have a shallow plan and a deep plan, because I know how ledges go, and just sometimes the school's gone, sometimes they move, sometimes they won't bite, sometimes you have company. So it's good to have a backup plan. But sometimes these events, we saw guys who did well at Fork. Some of those guys fished for an hour, and it was on first day of practice in the morning, and they spent the rest of practice idling and graphing. And sometimes that's what it takes, even if that annoys people with the technology and the electronics and stuff. That's something people have done for a decade or 15 years. People would just graph, and they would, find the mapping, find a ledge and go down it, and you find those golf ball size fish sometimes down there. And you're like, you know what, that is a good old, or the tic tacs. We always like to call them tic tacs on the graph. If you see some tic tacs, you found a good school. So sometimes selling out with Tennessee River guys that are okay with graphing for 3 straight days and not even having a fish photo to post on social media because they've graphed the whole time. Sometimes that's the key to these events. It'll probably be the key this week as well. And I think I've got that represented in some of my other picks as well. So go ahead and take me to bucket B and go ahead and pick your bucket B pick.
So bucket B, I'm going Chris Johnston. I know you went Chris Johnston last week.
Dipping into my pool.
I was really impressed with that pick just based on the fact that it worked out so well for you. Made a top 10 there.
Thank God.
But at 5.2%, obviously significantly lower. Off the top of my head, I'm seeing 27.9%, 13.8, a lot of sevens. A lot of the bucket is higher than Chris Johnston, which, let's be honest, both the Johnston brothers, you like them just about anywhere at this point. I mean, they've proved it everywhere. The first instinct is you think, obviously smallmouth fishing, that's a given. They've had success in Florida. But I went back and looked, a handful of ledge fishing style tournaments over his career at Bass, whether he's fishing the elites or not, have been really good finishes for him.
I think he did well at KY, didn't he?
Yes, 2015 Kentucky Lake, which was
B.A.S.S.
The Bass-Fest, yeah, straight up ledge fishing event, 13th. And there's a history of success doing that on these ledge fishing style tournaments, where a lot of people may not recognize Chris Johnston to be fantastic at that, or maybe his strength, but the results really speak for themselves for Chris Johnston. And like I said, really just about anywhere at this point. But at 5.2%, I'm definitely pulling that trick out of your hat, and I'm going with Chris Johnston and B.
Yeah, I will go ahead and talk about the elephant in the room that neither one of us picked Buddy Gross for this event. So Buddy Gross is a Chickamauga local, but he has probably won more big time tournaments on Pickwick than he has on Chickamauga, if we're being honest. Sure. And so I think that he has definitely unlocked Pickwick and knows kind of, and is very, very comfortable with how it is. Hey, I think he had a top 10 last year at Pickwick in the elites, even though it was not supposed to go his way with all the conditions we had changing it. So he knows a lot about Pickwick. At 28%, I will say I don't think his psyche's messed up at all, but I think that not doing well again at Chickamauga, it messed up his fork. He didn't do well at Fork, and I thought he would be one that would graph and find those schools. And like we said, sometimes you just have a bad week and you lose fish. He should have maybe he should have gotten 20th and he just lost them, but everyone's going to lose fish. So I'm a little scared to pick a couple of the Pickwick guys because of the trend that they're maybe struggling on right now. And so I did not pick Buddy Gross. A guy I did think about picking was Joseph Webster. It says Alabama on his thing now. He's about south of Pickwick a little ways. I guess he's halfway between Tuscaloosa and Pickwick, it seems, but he is from Mississippi originally, and he has done well in a lot of these offshore events. And I would be one. I would, gosh, I don't want to pick him. I'm not picking him right now, but I do really want to pick him, and I'll pick him for my other team. He'll be on my Drain the Lake team for sure. But I'm going with a good old Tennessee River boy, tried and true from his inner growing uppings, and that's Matt Robertson. He's one of those boys that's gonna graph for 3 straight days, and he's totally cool. He knows. I think he's one of those guys that's been licking his chops, waiting for an opportunity at a good old fashioned Tennessee River ledge event, and I think that we're not too far from his neck of the woods. Yes, Kentucky Lake's a long lake, and he's all the way at the top into Kentucky Lake, and we're going out of Pickwick, but he knows quite a bit about Pickwick as well, and at least how fish set up. I remember going back and forth each year, and some of the same ledges would show up, and they'd factor, but some they would just get too pressured and the fish would not show up there the next year, or how much current they have, and that kind of dictates it. And so one thing I'll see is, I think that we're going to see, I'm going to go ahead and predict this in the middle of bucket B picks. Depending on the amount of current flow we have, it's raining a good bit in Alabama. And it's kind of transitioned from Arkansas over to there. It's raining, so they're going to be moving some water. There's some current, and it's going to be getting hot. We're going to see guys take off from Tennessee, and they're going to run all the way to where it factored last year. The Coger Island, the Woodlands area, they're going to run there, because that's the first place the current's going to get hit. So if the current turns on, let's just say takeoff's at 7, Kyle, and current's kicking on at 8, they're going to go all the way that far to fish the first couple spots that maybe have current first. Those first schools that will experience the current, they're going to fish it first. And then they have time. It's almost like running the tide. If they go all the way there and catch some fish, they have about an hour to run back to Tennessee and to fish the ledges closer to takeoff, because those are the last places that get current. That's why every single college team in Pickwick that would do well, they'd either bust them in the morning in the first hour all the way down in Tennessee, or it would be the last 30 minutes of the day. By the time the current really got good down there, they'd catch them up and then have to run all the way back to Florence. Well, this time around, we're going to see guys catching them late in the day there, and they're going to have a 5-minute run to take off instead of a 55-minute run back to the way. And so I will say Matt Robertson, I think he understands that aspect of the current, where it's going to hit places earlier. Where do I need to time out my spots? Things like that. So I'm going with Matt Robertson. Plus, dude, he threw his dang glide bait fork on a catfish ugly stick. I mean, I'm cool if he's trusting that in an elite event. I'm cool to trust him on my fantasy team.
I hear you on that. So do you want to back us up with your bucket C pick?
Yeah, I'm going to go with a college flavor here. Some guys who have fished, they fished probably quite a few college events. Because if we're being honest, we said it's been a little while since we've had a good old fashioned Tennessee River ledge event. We've had some Gunnersville ones in the past, like we mentioned, but I will say for most of our elite field, the college anglers that have qualified recently have more tangible experience on Pickwick ledge season wise than those guys do. And so I'm going to have a little bit of college flavor in these next few picks, and I'm going with Jacob Fouts in bucket C. I was torn between Jacob Fouts and Mike Huff, who fished for Georgetown College the same time of year, the same, time period that I was in school. Mike Huff fished there. Jacob Fouts came after me whenever I was graduated and covering the college series, but he is a dragger. I will say he likes to fish shallow. He wants to be up the Hiwassee, but that's at Chickamauga. He does not necessarily vibe with other places on Chickamauga well, but I feel like he knows what to expect, his mindset going into Pickwick, and kind of will harness some memories, kind of know some high percentage areas. Basically, whether he fishes those spots or not that are very popular, he knows where to go to or where to avoid. He already has half that puzzle. So when he's graphing this week, it will be even more high percentage, because he's going to be like, this general stretch of the river is great. Now let me go up and down and find what's the juice spot on it. So I think that Fouts will be one to watch at Pickwick.
I dig it. So I'm sticking with, a Tennessee River guy. And when I say Tennessee River guy, he's not really a Tennessee River guy as far as location goes. But if you look once again at history of, Tennessee River events, I'm going with Clint Davis in bucket C. Also another pick sub 5%. The last time I had checked, I'll have to double check that really fast. 4.3%. Same kind of deal. You look at his success on, Tennessee River events, whether it be Wheeler back in 2016, Gunnersville 2019, and it's not like success where you're talking about top 10s. It's always in the top 20 though, top 25. And obviously the classic on Gunnersville, obviously not comparing times of year and this fishing styles, but it's just a comfortability with fishing on the Tennessee River. And if you look at Clint Davis's finish last year at Pickwick, one, like we've already mentioned, not going to be the same style of fishing remotely, but he was dealing with his shoulder injury. That was, I know at that point, bothering him really bad. So, I mean, I wouldn't put a whole lot of emphasis on, history at Pickwick per se, but, he's another one of those guys that I feel like can slide off to a ledge and make it work. So I'm going Clint Davis in bucket C.
Yeah, and I think it might have been his rookie year on the FLW Tour, straight out of Montevallo when he was in college. He went to the FLW Tour. Now that my camera's blurry. And I think he also has had really good finishes on Kentucky Lake and Eufaula in the summer. We mentioned that with Airy, and I think with Davis, that is also the case. Go ahead and take me to your bucket D pick, and while I try to get a clearer picture on this thing.
So bucket D, I am going with, I have got to go back to my fantasy fishing roster here. So bucket D, I am going chalk again. And this pick actually makes me a little nervous because I feel like we've talked about this the last few years. Whenever you get to this point in the season, you start to question whether or not they just strung together a couple bad events, or if it's going to be a matter of this is just going to be a bad year. And it happens. It happens to the best of the best. I mean, you look at John Cruz a couple of years ago is my first example I think of. He just had a bad year. And sometimes you have that. You fish professionally long enough, you're just bound to have that. With that being said, in bucket D, I'm going Brock Mosley. 28.3%, obviously super high. It kind of makes you wonder in your head why you would go 28.3% in bucket D, but you wouldn't go with Buddy Gross in bucket B. It's just kind of, balancing the high percentage and the low percentage. But, Mosley, obviously a ton of history on Pickwick, grew up fishing there a lot. I just feel like it's hard to imagine after his good event at Chickamauga, then back to not so good at Fork. I feel like right now is when he needs to make hay and, try to jump back up into the classic, cut line contention. And, I feel like there's really no better event to do it on than, by far the most home lake of any of the events of the year. And really probably any that, the Bassmaster League will ever fish. Yeah. So, I like, Brock Mosley in bucket D, like I said, high percentage, but I'm going to go with a high percentage in bucket D.
Yeah, I like that. And I actually spent a day with Brock Mosley down at his house shooting a feature that you guys will be able to see on bassmaster.com and on social media soon. And Brock loves Pickwick. This is the place that he really cut his teeth in tournament bass fishing at a high level. Obviously fishing some local tournaments and BFLs and things around his house, but coming to Pickwick, it was a trip. It was a place that he would learn a lot. You can fish a lot of different ways. And he said last year that when that water, and I mean, we dumped a whole nother lake on top of Pickwick, basically with the flooding. Right. He said, I know exactly what to do. And that was when he picked up the swim bait and went on those bluff walls and really caught him and got second place. He can't necessarily say, I know exactly what to do, because 93 other guys or 90 other elite pros are going to do that, and they're going to know what to do. And yes, you can have some hidden ledges and some secret things as well. But that's really not Brock's DNA. Brock's not a offshore dragger and kind of a electronics, let me graph the whole time. He really is a great chatterbait, spinnerbait, dirty water. It's his Mississippi roots coming out in him. And so that's Brock's style. I'm not hating against that pick at all, but like you said, it's a lot easier to go with a high percentage pick in bucket D and E, like with Livesey and Combs last week, than it is in bucket A, B, and C, because those guys are all in the classic right now and they're fishing well. And so there's a lot of guys that could fish well this week and overtake one of those high percentage guys. So I will say, to your credit, yes, picking a high percentage guy, it's easier to do it in bucket D and E, and you can get away with it that way. I did not go high percentage. I went guy who has really underperformed, in my opinion, on his rookie season on the Elite Series, and that's Cody Huff from Bethel University. to being one of the best live scope anglers out there, and now not doing as great this season. I think he made the cut at Fork. I will click his name real quick and see where he did, but I believe he did make the cut at Fork. And I'm wrong. I think he was doing well one day and then he dropped back. He's 69th place. He missed the cut. So really, out of 94 anglers, Huff hasn't really had a bad finish. He's finished 55th, 57th, 60th, 34th, and 69th. Like if 69th is your worst event of the year, that's a good season. He just has not broken through and gotten above that cut line. He needs to get a top 20 or a top 15 to really make a difference in AOY. Otherwise, he's just going to be swapping points in the middle of the pack all season. So I will say I was a little shocked he didn't do too great at Fork. But I think Bethel University, Kentucky Lake, fishing offshore, doing very well in the Pickwick events, learning from some of his college roommates and buddies that were really great at offshore fishing. I think that Huff is been around, even though he's from Missouri, he's been around the Tennessee River enough to know what to do. And I think I'm trying to guess his breakout event when we really get to see Cody Huff at full capacity. I'm trying to guess it, and I think that this could be the one that he gets it done. There are some other guys to consider. I think Brandon Card's one to consider as well in bucket D, 6% for Brandon Card. I think that he's an offshore guy as well, and he's willing to put in that time and do that. And he actually left his rig at my house and flew back home in between Fork and Pickwick, and he was just like, dude, I don't know what it is, but I'm in a little bit of a rut these last 3 or 4 events. I actually got out of Florida with decent finishes, and then I just have not done well in places I should. So maybe Card pick turns it around, but Bucket D, I'm going with Cody Huff.
So moving right along to Bucket E, I think you and I would both agree when you look at Bucket E right now, it is mind-boggling at the names that you see in this bucket, which makes it really difficult because once again, it goes back to what I just mentioned a moment ago and that you have echoed for the last few years as well, as you get later into the season and you just start to wonder if these guys will turn it around, and that will become even more prevalent the longer we go on in the season. But we're kind of getting at that turning point now where you're kind of starting to wonder, maybe they're just having a bad year. It's not a matter of turning it around. I mean, there might just be in the hole too much to come out of. With that being said,
and some of these guys are in that hole and their days are numbered. Like they have to Pickwick. There's not I hope I have a good event. They have to stop the avalanche at some point. They've got to put the sandbags up and protect their house from flooding at some point.
Right.
And it's getting to the point in the season where if you don't catch them at Pickwick and we go up north and you have one bad north event out of the last 3, you're done. You're not making the classic. You're not on the elites next year. You cannot dig yourself out of a 5 missed cut, 6 missed cut elite season. You have to catch them this event. So, I mean, and I'm just going to go ahead and say before we make our picks, look at Bucket E. I don't know if I've ever seen a bucket with the names that we have here in all of fantasy fishing of all time. Kyle Welcher, Brian Schmidt, Paul Mueller, Wes Logan, Mike Iaconelli, Keith Combs, Hank Cherry, Justin Atkins. I mean, that's like 5 million, 6 million in career earnings right there. Like that is incredible. That's like 27 pro level tournament wins between the groups there. It is unbelievable. And to me, it's very, very shocking, but one of these guys will get out of the rut this week.
Absolutely. I mean, it definitely is going to be the turning point for somebody. It's just hard to predict at this point who it's going to be for, but go ahead with what you
and I was going to say, instead of making our pick real quick, I'm going to throw you under the bus with me. We've talked about him all year. He's kind of every podcast and my heart breaks for him because I can see that indecision sometimes and not trusting your gut and whatnot. This is the event. If you haven't picked Justin Atkins all year and you're like, well, see, I was right. I didn't pick him and he hasn't done well. This would be the event you pick him in. But Kyle, are you at the point in the year where we both cannot pick him for our Rapala fantasy fishing team because he's no longer maybe the biggest name in Bucket E anymore? And if he hasn't caught him the rest of the season, he's got to catch him at his home lake, right? But there's a chance that he could just continue that streak and really not do well. I would love to see Justin rebound and do well in front of his hometown crowd. He lives I've stayed at his house. He lives 6 minutes from my favorite boat ramp on the lake. You know, he's right there, and a lot of hours spent here. And so I know he's going to be feeling the pressure to perform this week. But are you even considering picking him this week? Because I did not.
I'm definitely considering picking him. And the thing is, I feel like in my head and in my heart, I truly believe that this will be the event that he turns it around, has a stellar event, and carries that momentum. Obviously, we've seen that in professional bass fishing, I mean, countless times, where all it takes is that one event and the positive momentum will roll. Now, does it always work like that? Definitely not. I mean, there's plenty of circumstances where you could say, oh, wow, he broke out of it there, and then he just, goes back to having a bad event the next tournament. With that being said, I think that Atkins will break through this tournament. I really do. But I'm going.
But what's a breakthrough? Because his expectations at Pickwick for being bottom 5 in angler of the year, your expectations are probably like, I hope to make the cut, or I hope to catch a limit. I hope to make the cut. That's the expectations. But at Pickwick, for someone in bucket E, bottom 5 in AOI, expectations are win or bust, top 5. So what is a good event for you? What do you think that would be?
I mean, I want to say the first number that hit my head was a top 20, but I think a top 10 is what definitely
top 12, top 15.
If you ask Justin Atkins, he wants to go for broke and, either win or top 10. I mean, he wants to be picked on the final day. I mean, that's when you're that far down, especially at this point in the season, like you said, a 40th place finish or barely making the third day cut, is not going to do you nearly as much as if you can, secure a top 10 and in a place that he has every bit of ability and, like I said, really just every bit of ability to do it on. So
it's one of those, you don't want to just participate on day 3. You want to compete. Right. You want to be in it with a shot at day 4, and that's a good event. If you're within a fish of day 4, you feel like, hey, as a local, that's not a letdown. But yes, sure, there's a lot of pressure on him for multiple reasons this week. And so best of luck to everybody in Bucket E, because I know that at some point you got to stop that tap and turn it off. And Paul Mueller and Derek Hudnall both did it in Bucket E this past week at Lake Fork. Mueller getting 12th, Hudnall making the top 10. So best of luck to the guys in Bucket E. With that being said, it could be hit and miss for us. Who you going with?
I'm going with Brian Schmidt in Bucket E. And don't get me wrong.
Tell me why.
So it's the grass factor. Obviously I don't necessarily think you look at this tournament and you think there's, it's going to be dominated by grass, or it's going to be, that's going to be a huge focal point is fishing grass. But you look at somebody who in their entire career has been able to make that work on really any body of water that has submerged grass on it. Brian Schmidt is one of those guys.
He's going to look for it. He's not going to just find it. He's not going to stumble upon it. He's going to look for it. And if you find it, it could be, a train hitting not a train wreck, because that's a negative, but like you just beasted the other train. Yeah.
And the reality of it is too, when you look at grass fishing, this tournament, it's not going to be like your pre-spawn, chatterbaiting, vibrating jig. It'll be different. But the reality of it is he's able to catch them on grass at different times. We've seen it, over the course of his career, regardless, pre-spawn, spawn, post-spawn. If there's grass,
heat of the summer, yeah,
you're right. I mean, it seems like he's going to be able to figure it out. So, when I looked at Bucket E, that was one that, like you mentioned earlier, you don't mind going high percentage, but I want to say he was sub 5%. I want to say, I have to look at it again. 4.7%. I like Brian Schmidt to bounce back at Lake Fork at Pickwick. Like I said, that's going to be one of the buckets where I'm looking at it and thinking maybe I want to change last minute, but I think I'm going to ride it out with Brian Schmidt.
I'm picking a guy that people are really excited about joining the Elite Series in 2022, and that's Mike Iaconelli. And he has not necessarily shown up the way that Mike thought he would. Mike had taken a year and fished the opens and gotten fired back up for fishing again, and came in with a lot of momentum into the Elite Series. He did qualify through the Northerns, but I'm not putting that as an identifier on Mike Iaconelli, because we know he can catch him everywhere. And I think that he is one that is good at finding large, like if there's places that are only 5 to 10 fish schools, he will find a big school of fish somewhere, right. And he's not afraid of sharing it with people. He's not afraid of doing that mentally, because it's a different mindset.
What you're saying is that he's going to be part of the community this week.
He is most definitely going to be a part of the community this week. And I think that's going to keep him in the mix. I think he's going to be afraid. He's not going to be afraid to run around, fish a couple different schools and do that. But I also think he knows he's a tidal guy as well. And I know that current fish are different than tidal fish, but moving water and timing up moving water, I think that's a different skill set. And I think for Mike Iaconelli, we've seen him do well on some Tennessee River events, and I'm expecting Ike to do well this week. There's some other guys in there, man. It's an all-star event in Bucket E on who's going to show up this week. And so I think honestly, the door's been wide open the last 3 or 4 weeks from the names that I mentioned. Ain't nobody showed up. Nobody showed up at all. So Mike Iaconelli, 6%. Also, you're not going to, when he was in Bucket E, he was like a high percentage guy in Bucket E, and now it's kind of wore off a little bit. It kind of has worn off a little bit, and 6% Mike Iaconelli, that's actually affordable. So that's our Rapala teams. I'll go through my team real quick. Matt Airy, Matt Robertson, Jacob Fouts, Cody Huff, Mike Iaconelli for my good old fashioned Tennessee River picks.
I have David Mullins, Chris Johnston, Clint Davis, Brock Mosley, and Brian Schmidt.
I'm back in clear again. I have to shut my camera off. I don't know why it's doing that. It might be the lighting. Say your team one more time because I was zoned out.
David Mullins, Chris Johnston, Clint Davis. What did I say in E? Or in D?
Brock Mosley.
Brock Mosley, I'm sorry. And Brian Schmidt.
Okay, perfect. Let's go to Drain the Lake real quick, and we will list off our 8 anglers 4 at a time like we normally do. If we've picked some guys, you obviously know why we picked them. If we picked them in Rapala and they duplicate, I'll go ahead and pick my 4. And we've mentioned all 4 of these anglers: Justin Atkins, Joseph Webster, Matt Robertson, and David Mullins. Sitting at 96% for me right now. And my teams, if you're just tuning in for the first time, my teams have been set since January. I picked them all looking at the schedule, and we just went ahead and did it. It was something Tommy Sanders and I wanted to do in studio for fun, and Such. And so the 3 of us have just picked our teams well in advance, and I've stuck with them all year just to see how we do it. Since I can't win percentage-wise, I can do that. It might smear my King of Fantasy reputation, but it's okay. Justin Atkins, Joseph Webster, Matt Robertson, and David Mullins. Those are my first 4 picks for Drain the Lake.
So I also have Justin Atkins, Clint Davis, Mike Iaconelli, and Scott Canterbury to start out my Drain the Lake squad.
Well, you've already had 3 of those mentioned in various ways. I mentioned Iaconelli for you. Why did you save Ike for this one? And also talk to me about Canterbury a little bit.
So Canterbury, okay, you look back to that exact same Eufaula tournament we discussed. Also, maybe not the first thing you think about with Scott Canterbury, but his success in tournaments fishing offshore for schools of fish is also very positive. And it kind of gets to the point of the year with Drain the Lake where I did not select my entire team. So you start looking at the roster and you think, well, if I don't use this guy now, let's be honest. I mean,
when you're going to use them, yeah.
Right. But you talk about the smallmouth events. I could basically rattle off 16 anglers that I'm going to have for Oahe and the St. Lawrence River. And I haven't decided which one's going to go which yet, but some of those tournaments are very obvious. And then you think about the Mississippi River, have some, shallow water, river fishermen, things of that nature.
Maybe Midwesterners. Yeah.
Right. And then I go through this tournament where, a Scott Canterbury is still available for me to pick. And like I said, his ability to fish offshore for schools of fish, I thought it was kind of a no-brainer.
He did the same thing at Cayuga, and he did the same thing at the St. Lawrence River. It's a different kind of schools of fish. Those are related to grass and obviously rock and current. But
Gunnersville
was able to do that.
Yeah. I mean, just a variety of different times you can look at.
And maybe Matt Airy and Scott Canterbury will be like, hey, I've got 17 offshore spots and I have 12, share some with me, and they have a link, and that happens, and we'll see if it happens this week.
So just to run through those one more time: Justin Atkins, Scott Canterbury, Clint Davis, and Mike Iaconelli. All the other ones we've obviously talked about.
Yeah. And then my last 4, Mark Menendez, Brandon Lester, Mike Huff, and Micah Frazier. I like Micah Frazier for fishing offshore events. I feel like he was somebody I noticed early in his career doing well doing that. I think he has a great track record at Kentucky Lake as well, at the FLW days, and I think even early in his bass career. Then we go to Mark Menendez. Man, Mark Menendez has so much history on Pickwick. And, when Chuck Economo caught like 28 pounds of smallmouth and he was like wowing the crowd, Mark Menendez took him to the woodshed and said, you know what, I'm going to still beat you in this event. So Mark Menendez has a win on Pickwick. He's from the Tennessee River as well. Obviously, that's Kentucky Lake, and we've talked a lot about Kentucky Lake, but those two are intertwined. They're connected. They're the two largest, seemingly. They have the most ledges that you could possibly fish out of the Tennessee River Lakes. Those two do. And then Mike Huff, a lot of college experience here. I didn't pick him for Rapala. I picked him for Drain the Lake. And for Brandon Lester, there's no Gunnersville on the schedule, so there's no other lake that I think that Lester should be primed up more for. And I think also in the Open in April last year, a little bit offshore, a little bit of shad spawn, a little bit of that stuff going on. I think he did well in that event. He just has a really good summer track record as well in the Elite Series. Hey, and I was worried at Lake Fork. I had him on my Rapala team in Bucket A. I was really, really worried. And after no bass track popped in for him on day 2, he ended up coming in with 20 pounds or something and snuck into the cut and then moved up another 5 or 6 spots. So Lester made the cut for me, did not tarnish my Bucket A record and got me in the cut. So there's my last 4: Menendez, Lester, Huff, the Mike variety, and Micah Frazier. I will say I've got Atkins, Webster, Robertson, Mullins, Menendez, Lester, Huff, and Frazier.
So to round out my 4, obviously you just talked about him quite a bit. Brandon Lester's on my roster as well. Joseph Webster, for the same reason that you and I had talked about earlier. Matt Robertson, same reason we talked about. And I've actually got Josh Strassner. So obviously some positive momentum rolling. Yeah, some positive momentum rolling from Lake Fork, obviously fishing offshore, fishing for offshore. I would say schools of fish. I watched them on the last day. I would say it was wads of fish. I wouldn't say it was like a school in a traditional sense where you're getting them fired up and that kind of thing. But I've got to know Josh pretty well over the last couple of years, and I do know that he does like to offshore fish and crank and do the types of things that should work perfectly fine at Pickwick. So I'm going Strassner to round out my roster.
And he loves Lake Eufaula.
Oh yeah, it's like his favorite lake on planet Earth. He's told me that a handful of times. So
and he lives on the Coosa River and knows how current affects fish as well. It might be different having a visible eddy that you're fishing, but if you think about a ledge and you underwater, you see the same thing. Real quick, what's your winning weight prediction? So last week it was easy. We both were like, it's going to be over 100, and we split the difference. You went 6 to 8 pounds lower than 114. I went 8 to 9 pounds higher than 114, and it was at 113 and change. So right there, we were on. I was on the heavy side. You're on the light side of that, about equal. What are you thinking about Pickwick? Because we both made our weight picks without talking to each other.
So I went 86-10. I think over 20 pounds a day, and I think somebody one day is going to smash them really big. To get to that, mid to upper 80s. I think realistically it'll be a little lower than that, but I always go low. I historically have done that every single tournament, so I'm going to go a little higher here in hopes that I hit it right on the head.
I just changed my weight right then. I just changed it, not because of what you said with 86, but just thinking about it and someone busting a bag and someone finding one of those schools of fish that just can blow it away. That's a possibility. I had it at 82.11. 82.11, so basically 20 and a half pounds per day. And to win, I think I'm going to move it up to 84 3/4. So, 21 and change to win this event. So I could be a little low as well. I think the upper reaches of Pickwick this week could be 90, and the lower reaches could be like 78. I think 78 to 90, that 12-pound range in there, you're going to have a lot of top 12 guys somewhere, top 10 guys somewhere in there. So you went 86. I went 84. I wanted to go 82. I also wanted to go 90. I just have high hopes. I love Pickwick. But for this event, I mean, other than Lake Norman's where I grew up, and you grew up on Hamilton and Ouachita. If you had to pick a lake that was your favorite lake in the country other than those two, what would it be? Because my favorite lake in the country, other than my home lake at Lake Norman, is Pickwick. Pickwick is my favorite lake of all time, is the place I felt most comfortable. And I think as a friend groups, I had a lot of friends at UNA staying with them at the houses, at the hotels. It was very familiar to me, and I just loved Pickwick so much. So I'm so excited to call a tournament here, especially in the summer, which was when we were supposed to have this event last year. We flip-flopped it with the Classic. Then we had the high water, and it was totally different than anyone could have ever imagined.
Yeah, no doubt. So to answer your question, as far as favorite lake outside of Hamilton and Washita, it would have to be Bull Shoals. But if you just want to get out of the state, that's my favorite lake.
The Missouri side of Bull Shoals.
Right. Now, if you had to get out of the state, I would probably say Sam Rayburn or Toledo Bend. If I had to say right this second, I'd probably say Sam Rayburn just because it's kind of more on the upswing versus Toledo Bend. But the longevity of Toledo Bend, like, growing up and everything, I really enjoyed fishing.
Gosh. Yeah, and the height of our childhoods and kind of college aged years was when it was number one in the country. So well, awesome. There it is. Fantasy fishing preview, a little bit of technique and kind of what we expect to see the tournament play out as. Practice is going to be Sunday, Monday, Tuesday this week, off day on Wednesday, tournament Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And so we will end it up about a week from when we're posting this. Excited for Pickwick. I know you are as well. Whataburger is on as the title sponsor for the event. You can watch it all go down. Make sure if you do show up for the weigh-ins, you do not show up on the wrong end of Pickwick. We're all the way at the far north end, which is kind of weird saying. It starts out as an east to west layout, and then it turns to north to south real quick at the end. And Pickwick is Counts, Tennessee is our host this week. So go to the state park up there and be able to check that out. So Kyle, thank you for joining me, man. Let's hope and pray both of our fantasy teams just do so well, and that mine does a little bit better than yours.
Yeah, hopefully that's not the case, but hopefully they're both in the positive. But I'll stay at just a couple percentages ahead of you, hopefully.
Yes, I hope that's the case as well. Well, Kyle, I will we'll see you on the water, and you'll see me in studio for Pickwick. Peace.